I was sitting at a tiny cafe table on a cobblestone street in Lisbon, the kind you see on postcards, sunlight pouring through the trees, a warm breeze carrying the scent of fresh bread. My cappuccino was still steaming, my laptop open to the back end of my travel blog. A little red notification blinked on the corner of my screen. Another new follower. I clicked, and my heart caught in my chest. Emily Parker. Emily, one of the girls who once sat across from me at a diner in Ohio and told me, with a smirk, that I was boring. She said I never did anything spontaneous, never lived a little. Back then, I laughed it off, but it stung in ways I never admitted. Now, here she was, liking my photo of the sunrise in Santorini, commenting, "So jealous. Wish I could do this." I took a sip of coffee, letting the moment settle in. My fingers brushed over the soft cotton of my travel scarf, its edges fraying from countless flights. The smell of buttery croissants drifted from the bakery inside. My phone buzzed again, another message. This time from Jason Miller, another old friend who used to joke about my boring little life. Funny how people change their tune when your office is the world. I glanced at the blinking cursor on my screen. The title of my next post appeared in my mind before I typed it. They called me boring. Now they're following my every move. 3 years ago, my life looked nothing like it does now. I was 27, living in Columbus, Ohio, working as a customer service rep for an insurance company. My days were a blur of polite phone calls, lukewarm coffee, and the constant hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I wore the same rotation of blouses every week, tucked into black slacks, my hair pulled back in the same low ponytail. Stability was my comfort zone and my cage. Friday nights, my friends would gather at Miller's Bar and Grill. Emily, Jason, and the rest of our circle would tell loud stories about their latest adventures, weekend trips to Vegas, impulsive tattoos, crazy dating escapades. I listened, laughed in the right places, and sipped my soda. One night, Emily turned to me, leaning across the sticky table. "You know, Rachel, you're nice. But you're kind of boring." The table erupted in laughter. Jason chimed in, "Yeah, Rach, when's the last time you did something crazy? Like anything?" I smiled tightly, but my cheeks burned. I wanted to say I had dreams, real ones. That I wanted to see the Eiffel Tower at dawn, eat street food in Bangkok, ride a train across Europe. But the words caught in my throat. That night, I drove home in silence. My apartment felt too small, too still. I pulled out the one thing I'd never shown anyone, a leather-bound travel journal my grandmother, Evelyn, had given me for my 21st birthday. On the first page, she'd written in her looping script, "For when you decide to see the world, don't wait for anyone's permission." I traced her handwriting with my fingertip. She'd been a free spirit in her youth, backpacking across the states in the 70s, camping under the stars. I'd grown up on her stories, but somewhere along the way, I'd convinced myself they weren't meant for me. That night, something shifted. I spent hours researching cheap flights, budget hostels, and freelance jobs I could do online. I didn't know how I'd pull it off, but I knew I couldn't stay in the same loop forever. By the time the sun came up, I had booked a one-way ticket to Lisbon. My stomach fluttered with equal parts fear and exhilaration. For the first time in years, I felt alive. I closed the journal and whispered into the quiet apartment, "I'm going." My first day in Lisbon felt like stepping into another life. The air was warmer, salter from the nearby sea. Narrow streets twisted and turned like they had secrets to tell, the buildings painted in pastel pinks and yellows. My rented hostel room was barely bigger than a walk-in closet, with creaky wooden floors and a view of a crumbling tiled courtyard. But to me, it felt like freedom. Freedom and chaos. I got lost within hours of arriving. My phone battery died halfway through trying to navigate to a grocery store. A sudden rainstorm left me shivering under an awning, clutching a paper bag of bread and cheese. That first week, I learned how heavy my backpack really was, how hard it was to sleep when you shared a room with 4 strangers, and how terrifying it could be to order coffee in a language you didn't understand. But I also learned something else. How good it felt to try. One afternoon, in a tiny cafe, I met Claire, a seasoned travel photographer from Chicago. She noticed me scribbling in my journal between sips of espresso. "You should start a blog," she said, matter-of-factly. "Your stories have heart. People would read them." I laughed it off, but she leaned in. "I'm serious. Share the messy parts, the real parts. That's what connects." That night, I stayed up late in the hostel's dim common room, creating a free blog. I called it The Unfolded Map. My first post was short, just a few paragraphs about getting caught in the rain and finding shelter in a bakery where the owner gave me a free pastel de nata. I hit publish and didn't think much of it. Weeks turned into months. I traveled slowly, Lisbon to Porto, then Madrid, then the south of France. I took photos on my second-hand camera, wrote about night trains and language mishaps, about the people who offered kindness to stranger. Little by little, strangers began to comment. A college student in Canada said my posts inspired her to plan her first solo trip. A woman in her 50s wrote that she'd been afraid to travel alone until she read my stories. By the time I reached Italy, my blog had a small but loyal following. I learned how to pitch brands for sponsorships, how to sell my photography, how to work with travel companies who wanted authentic storytelling. It wasn't glamorous. There were plenty of sleepless nights and days where my bank account made me sweat, but every month I inched forward. I didn't tell Emily, Jason, or anyone back home how well things were going. On social media, I posted just enough to let people know I was traveling for a while, but never the full scope. This was mine, and I wasn't ready to share it with those who once made me feel small. By the end of my first year, The Unfolded Map had grown to thousands of monthly readers. My income was modest, but steady. I traded my cubicle for cobblestones, my morning commute for a boarding gate. And I wasn't looking back. It happened on a warm September afternoon in Florence. I had been in the city for 2 weeks, renting a small apartment above a gelato shop. My days were filled with photographing the morning light on Ponte Vecchio and writing in the afternoons with the sound of street musicians drifting through my window. I had just finished editing a post about Cinque Terre when my phone buzzed with a WhatsApp message from an unfamiliar number. "Hey Rach, it's Emily. Guess what? We're in Italy. Jason's here too. We saw you were in Florence from your blog. Want to meet for dinner?" For a moment, I just stared at the screen. I hadn't spoken to either of them in nearly 3 years. Curiosity and maybe a pinch of poetic justice made me type back, "Sure. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. I'll send the address." The next evening, I reserved a table at one of my favorite rooftop restaurants overlooking the Duomo. I arrived early, wearing a cream silk blouse I'd picked up in Paris and gold earrings I'd bought in a tiny boutique in Santorini. My laptop bag rested at my feet, the same one that had traveled through dozens of airports with me. When Emily and Jason arrived, their expressions flickered. Surprise, maybe even disbelief. I greeted them warmly, letting them settle in before the conversation began. "This view is insane," Jason said, glancing over the city's terracotta rooftops. "I know," I smiled. "It's one of my favorite places to write." "You write here?" Emily asked, tilting her head. I nodded. "Pretty often. My schedule's flexible." We ordered dinner, fresh pasta, wine, bread still warm from the oven. They asked polite questions about my travels, and I answered vaguely at first. But halfway through the meal, Emily leaned forward. "Your blog is huge. We've been reading it for months. How did you even do all this?" I set down my glass, letting the moment hang in the air. "Well, I began. After you all said I was boring, I bought a one-way ticket. I started writing, taking photos, telling stories. People started reading. Brands started calling. And now, I gestured toward the city spread out before us. This is my life." Jason chuckled awkwardly. "Wait, so this is like your job?" "It's my business," I corrected gently. "I own The Unfolded Map. It has over 200,000 readers a month. I've partnered with airlines, hotels, even tourism boards. I've published a travel guide that's sold in 5 countries." Their eyes widened. Emily blinked, as if processing each number. "Wow." I had no idea. I smiled. No one did. I wanted to prove it to myself first. Silence settled over the table, broken only by the clink of silverware. I could feel their curiosity, their discomfort. This wasn't the Rachel they remembered, the one who always played it safe, who sat quietly while others told their stories. As the sun dipped behind the dome of the cathedral, I told them about waking up at 4 a.m. to catch a train, about getting lost in Tokyo and being rescued by a kind shopkeeper, about negotiating contracts with companies that once ignored my emails. I spoke without bitterness, just truth. By the end of the night, their tone had shifted. Emily asked for tips on solo travel. Jason admitted he'd always wanted to see more of the world but never found the right time. When the check came, I paid it without hesitation. "Consider it a welcome to my world," I said lightly. But inside, I knew it was more than that. It was the quiet satisfaction of showing them exactly who I had become. The next morning, Emily texted me, "Can we meet again? There's so much we didn't get to talk about." Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let last night be enough. But something in her tone felt different, less performative. So I agreed, suggesting we meet at a cafe near Piazza Santo Spirito. They arrived looking more casual, less like tourists ticking off a checklist. Jason had a notebook tucked under his arm. Emily wore no makeup, her hair pulled into a messy bun. After a few pleasantries, Emily leaned in. "I've been thinking. I want to travel more. But I'm scared. You make it look easy." I shook my head. "It's not easy. But it's worth it. And if you really want it, you have to change how you live, starting now." Jason frowned. "Change how we live? Like what?" I folded my hands on the table. "Here's the deal. If you both want to be part of my adventures, or even start your own, you have to drop the habits that keep you stuck." I turned to Emily first. "You have to stop comparing yourself to everyone around you. It's the fastest way to stay exactly where you are. Start saying yes to things that scare you, even small ones." She nodded slowly, biting her lip. Then to Jason, "You have to stop waiting for the right time. It doesn't exist. If you keep waiting, years will pass and you'll still be dreaming instead of doing. Book a trip. Even if it's messy. Even if you're not ready." They both stayed quiet, absorbing the words. "And one more thing," I added. "You need to be willing to be uncomfortable. Travel isn't always beautiful beaches and perfect photos. Sometimes it's missed trains, language barriers, and cold showers. But if you can find joy in that, you'll never go back to your old life." Jason scribbled something in his notebook. Emily stared into her coffee, thoughtful. "I'm not offering to hold your hand," I said gently. "I'll give advice, I'll share resources, but I'm not dragging anyone along. You have to want it for yourself." There was no malice in my voice, just clarity. I cared about them, despite the past, but I had no interest in being pulled back into the patterns that once kept me small. Finally, Emily smiled faintly. "You know, I think I needed to hear that." Jason looked up from his notes. "Me too." We spent the rest of the morning talking about practical steps, how to budget, how to find affordable flights, how to build work that could travel with them. By the time we said goodbye, something in their energy had shifted. I wasn't sure if they'd follow through. But I'd given them the map. It was up to them to take the journey. 2 months later, I was in Morocco, wandering through the winding souks of Marrakesh, when my phone buzzed with 2 new messages. The first was from Emily, a selfie of her standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, hair windblown, cheeks flushed. "Booked it last minute. You were right, it's messy, but I'm loving it." The second was from Jason, a photo of a mountain trail in Colorado. Not overseas yet, but I finally stopped waiting. Next stop, who knows? I stared at the screen for a long moment, smiling to myself. Maybe they'd never live quite the way I did. Maybe they'd never crave the constant movement, the uncertainty, the thrill of waking up somewhere entirely new. But they were moving, and that mattered. That night, back in my riad, I pulled out my grandmother Evelyn's travel journal, the one that had started it all. The leather was worn soft now, the pages filled with my own handwriting. I flipped to the very first page and traced her words again. "Don't wait for anyone's permission." I thought of the girl I had been, sitting in that Ohio diner, cheeks burning as my friends laughed. I thought of the fear I'd felt booking that first one-way ticket, of the rainstorm in Lisbon, of the countless times I'd almost given up. And I thought of now, of the life I'd built, the people I'd met, the way the world had unfolded itself to me, one journey at a time. Travel had given me more than stamps and a passport. It had given me myself. I closed the journal, slipping it back into my bag. Tomorrow, I'd take a sunrise hot air balloon ride over the desert. Next week, who knew? That was the beauty of it. As I turned off the light and let the quiet of the Moroccan night settle around me, I knew the final line of my next blog post. They once called me boring. Now they follow my footsteps across the world, one country at a time.